there was a massive windstorm outside. So I don't know how long this is going to work, but we've all learned how to adapt, right? And be flexible with all of this. I'm Deb Newman, president of the Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce, and Shelley Sund is producing our seminar this afternoon. And we're grateful to Anne-Marie Story joining us from Rudman Winchell. Karen Sichters is there, also producing the Rudman side of this.
Oh God.
And
or not.
if this is your first time joining us, we started doing this. Oh my gosh, it's probably only been a month, but it feels like
it seems like a lot longer than that.
A lot longer than that. When even before we had the first case in the state of Maine, and you know, from the very beginning, there have been a lot of questions from employers, and who better to answer those or try to answer those than Anne-Marie Story, who specializes in employment law with Rudman Winchell. And we thank you so much, Anne-Marie, for doing this. We've decided to make this a weekly event, although next Monday is a holiday, so we will skip that. But going forward, Mondays at 3 o'clock, we will be joined by Rudman Winchell, and we'll take your questions. So Anne-Marie, let's just start with you. You have some updates for us.
We do, of course, right? Because why wouldn't we? But I thought maybe we would start with the non-COVID related paid leave law for the state of Maine. So because as of right now, and I know, Deb, you may have some better information than I do about this, but as of right now, the remote public hearing on the proposed rules is scheduled for Wednesday from 5 to 7 p.m. So just to make sure everybody knows what I'm talking about, these are the proposed regulations that the Department of Labor issued about Maine's paid leave law that goes into effect 1/1/21. It has nothing to do with COVID or the amended paid leave we've been talking about for a month under COVID. This is that law that was passed in September and raised quite a few questions that had not been answered in the actual language of the law, particularly for those of you who employ part-time or per diem people, and how this law was going to apply to them. For those of you who may not remember, what the law does is provide up to 40 hours of paid leave for every employee working for every employer, and that's for a period of 1 year of employment. So the regulations have now been issued. As I said, the remote public hearing is scheduled for 2 days from now. Now, Deb, you had mentioned that there was a possibility that might be delayed.
Yes, I was on a call with the Maine State Chamber late last week, and they are encouraging that be postponed, given that employers focus
some other things to think about.
Right, is elsewhere. I have not heard an update yet this morning, but as soon as we wrap this up, I will circle back and find out where that stands, and then I'll post an update in the comments under this video on the Facebook Live. Okay.
Because if that goes forward, well, so as of right now, the listening session is 2 days from now, and the end of the comment period is April 27th. And I strongly encourage employers to look at these proposed rules and let the Department of Labor know if you feel like they don't address some of your concerns, specifically how this applies to part-time and per diem people who are specifically covered by the law. And there are a lot of other areas that people might want some further comment on. So this is your one chance to let the Department of Labor know what the concerns are. So that's out there. If you want the proposed regulations, we can put them on the site, right, Deb? I can email them to you.
Yeah, that would be great.
And also they're available on the Department of Labor's website. They're not very long. They're basically 3 pages. Not a lot of information. It clarifies some of the things we had concerns about, but not all of them. So So that's important to know. So that's the non-COVID related part of today.
Okay, we'll get an update on that. If you're watching us and you have a question for Anne Marie, just post your question, or you can private message us if you prefer to keep that private. Shelley Sund and Karen are monitoring those questions, and they're sharing those with me in the chat room here on our Zoom event. So if you have any questions, just post them in the comments. Since last week, Anne Marie, what questions have you been hearing from employers?
Well, so before we get to that, there are 4 or 5 new things that I want to make sure people are aware of. So maybe I could go over those first.
Perfect.
First of all, the EEOC has issued its own directive that they have temporarily suspended the issuance of right to sue letters. So that's significant for employers who are currently facing charges of discrimination. And this does not have anything to do with COVID itself. These are things that might already be in the works. And as you know, once the EEOC either concludes its investigation or employee chooses to stop it and ask for a right to sue letter, that starts the clock for the employee to file a lawsuit. So the EEOC has temporarily suspended those unless the employee specifically asks for one, which basically means that everything is sort of put on hold for now. So folks don't have to concentrate on doing those at the same time as dealing with everything else. Although the rationale from the EEOC was a couple things. One is that a concern that employees would have difficulty finding an attorney in this current status where people might not be working or working on reduced schedules, and employees might be in a worse financial situation than they would ordinarily be in and can't afford to pay somebody. So so they are putting those on hold. That might give some relief to some employers too. So the next update is that OSHA has issued a new poster. It does not say anything on the OSHA website about the poster being mandatory. So there's that. The poster is about how to prevent COVID in the workplace. Like basically, well, yeah, I was deficient in how I printed it. But you can go on OSHA's website, it is there. It's 10 steps workplaces can take to reduce the risk of exposure to COVID. It doesn't say anything that
I think we're having sound issues. She's connecting. There. Can you hear us now, Ann?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but we can't hear Ann.
Anne Marie, can you hear us? Thumbs up. No.
We can go off and then go back on if you want.
Okay, why don't we try that? Apologies. Having some technical difficulties. So we will see if we can correct this.
Oh, she's connected.
I think all right, we're
Yep.
I think. So
Yep.
what's the last thing you heard?
You were talking about the OSHA 10 steps.
Oh, all right. So this is the poster, 10 steps all workplaces can take to reduce the risk of exposure to COVID. It is, there is nothing on the website that says it's mandatory to post this, but I think doing so will be a step in the right direction. You're showing that you complied with OSHA's general safe workplace. And so I would strongly suggest that all employers put this up. So you can get it off of the OSHA's website, or we can make it available to you, Deb, and you can post it if you want to do that.
Anne Marie, your audio is a little bit in and out. I don't know if we can fix that on your end. What we can do also is after the call, perhaps we can, when we post this on our Facebook, we can put a link in the comments to that OSHA page to
Okay.
get information. Would you also recommend that employers, since most of us aren't in the office right now, that we email that to our remote workers? Is that a good practice?
I would say yes. I mean, a lot of this stuff is things that you would do in the workplace. So if you're working remotely, it's not as applicable. But if you have people coming in and out and picking up mail or stuff, then I would definitely say yes, I would do that.
Okay.
And it may apply to home offices as well. I mean, it has things like, encourage people to stay home if they're sick, respiratory etiquette, all the things that we've been hearing about. So the safest thing, the best thing is just to make sure all your employees have it and see it. The other thing that OSHA did just recently was to confirm, now this is only for non-healthcare industry, emergency response organizations, and correctional institutions. So those three categories those are, what I'm about to say is not applicable to those groups, okay? What OSHA said is that COVID is a recordable illness, and employers are generally responsible for recording cases of COVID. But OSHA will not enforce its record keeping requirements for employers who are not those three listed categories, unless there's objective evidence that a COVID case is related and the evidence was reasonably available to the employer. So if there's a question about so if somebody comes in and says, I think I was exposed, but I have no idea if it was here or somewhere else, according to this directive, that is not an OSHA reportable event unless you are a healthcare industry emergency response organization or correctional institute, in which case it might be. So it just exempts all other kinds of employers from having to report a recordable incident unless it's pretty certainly has happened in the workplace. And of course, that raises workers' comp issues as well. Okay, so the EEOC has issued some new directives as well. I'm just going to go through a couple of them because they have to do with medical information. So one of them is if an employer obtains information on an employee related to COVID, and this includes things like if you have temperatures taken every day and you record that information, that's now confidential medical information, which has to be stored confidentially, okay? What the EEOC is saying is that you can still keep medical information related to COVID in an employee's, in the same place you keep any other medical information related to an employee, as long as it is held confidentially. Make sense? So in other words, there's no special requirement to separate out medical information related to COVID as opposed to any other medical information.
I don't know if you can hear me, but we've lost Anne Marie's audio.
Yeah, we have. They're having a problem with their speaker.
Yeah, it's been cutting out. So if you can still see us and hear us, we apologize. We'll see if we can correct that on their end. And in the meantime, if you have any questions for Anne Marie while we get her back, if you're still hearing me, Deb Newman from the Chamber and Shelley Sund is here from the Chamber as well. Shelley's in her house, I'm in my house. You can post your questions in the comments in the event, and we'll see if we can get those answered for you. I'm still having some technical difficulties. We are getting some questions coming in. Appreciate these.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh my gosh.
All right, we're good.
Sorry. All right, I don't know where we were. Did you hear any of the EEOC stuff?
Yeah, why don't we launch in with some questions, unless there's anything else you want to be sure that we know about.
Well, there are quite a few other updates, but I guess if we want to do questions, we can do that.
We have a question from a
Let me
viewer.
preface this by saying this is not about PPP. I see a lot of those questions. I
Yeah.
am not an expert in PPP. That's an entirely different area than basic employment issues related to this stuff.
Yeah, and your PPP questions, we've got some good resources on PPP. We're actually having an early bird breakfast, virtual early bird breakfast Wednesday here on Facebook at 9 o'clock. And we will be talking about the PPP Wednesday at 9. So if you want to join us for that, that would be great. And I also have some other information I can, I'm going to make myself a note, PPP info. I'll try to add to the comments later. So we'll focus on the employment questions. We have a question from an employee that reports they have cold symptoms, but believe it's nothing more than either a cold or allergies. Should the employer have employee use the FFCRA hours just in case, or have the employee use their own sick time?
Well, you go back to what the requirements of the FFCRA are. So you're talking about, so you have to go through the qualifying reasons. Are they under a quarantine? It sounds like no. Have they been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine? Doesn't sound like it. The only way that if they have potential symptoms of COVID, they would be entitled to the paid sick leave is if they were actually seeking a medical diagnosis, which means they are actively consulting or trying to consult with a physician. So if somebody just says, you know, I'm whatever, I have a headache, I have a sore throat, I'm not feeling well, that alone, without their going forward to seek medical diagnosis, is not likely to qualifying under the FFCRA. But they would be able to use whatever paid leave they have accrued if they feel like they want to go out, or if you feel like they ought not to be in the workplace.
Okay. Here's another one. If an employee's spouse is in the reserves and activated to work as COVID response within the US, does that fall under emergency leave FMLA, even if it is not a foreign assignment?
I don't have the language of the reserve reasons for FMLA right in front of me. That's not one that falls under the emergency FMLA. It could very well fall under the regular FMLA, but I would have to check the specific language of the reserve exigency law to be sure.
And this is related By the way, if you're just joining us, I'm Deb Newman with the Bangor Region Chamber of Commerce. Anne-Marie Story is here, our employment law expert with Rudman Winchell. Shelley Sund is working behind the scenes, as is Karen Sichters, to produce this. Thank you for joining us. I have DSPs who have been declared healthcare workers and not subject to the extended FMLA. However, wanting to be fair to employees, we have decided to use the basic framework of the Leave Act. This is not a problem, is it?
Well, I guess I need to make sure that I understand the question. So if, first of all, I assume it's the employer who has declared them to be healthcare workers, since that's who makes that determination. So it sounds like what they're saying is we could exempt them, but we've chosen not to be fair. If I'm reading that correctly, then I agree that's not a problem. It's up to the employer whether they choose to exempt healthcare workers or emergency responders. My only caveat is that I would very strongly encourage you to be sure you apply that consistently. So you can't exempt one person and then give the leave to a different person in the same job category, because that would automatically pretty much raise a discrimination issue. But yes, you can, there's no requirement that an employer exclude healthcare workers or emergency responders. It's up to the employer whether to do that.
Okay. If you have questions, just type them in the comments, and we'll try to get as many as we can. A few weeks ago, Anne-Marie, we had talked about you were working on putting together a summary of COVID laws. Remember that?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And you did your homework and you put together this awesome summary and fact sheet, and then everything changed just like that. So one of the questions was, are things starting to settle down a little bit?
Sadly, they're not, because I think the more people get into this, now that people are actually going out, and I think the reality of it is starting to hit, and the DOL is realizing that some of the language they've used is internally inconsistent. I have one of those examples. Some things are not clear, so they keep issuing more and more updates to clarify what they've said before. Having said that, though, I think that there is a very basic framework, and at this point it may be too basic for everybody who's heard about this forever and a day. But it basically breaks down, is somebody entitled to leave? So I had like 8 reasons why somebody might go out, and then I tried to assess, is it paid leave? No. If no, is it unemployment? And that I still think that I could probably disseminate. So since next week is a holiday, and by the way, I'm here. So if we want to do it, if you guys don't consider it a holiday, let's go for it and do another one. But yes, I think I could send you something for you to post.
That would be that. And you look so happy about it.
Because I just know what's going to happen is that the minute I send it to you, then all hell is going to break loose, and it's going to be, everything's going to change completely. But
well, is there something, without getting into the weeds, that perhaps you could put on the Rudman site that you just date with updates?
That's what I would have to date it. Yeah.
Yeah.
The question is, how involved do you get? Because if you start to explain any of the provisions about any of the laws, that's when everything falls apart, because that's where all the changes come. I mean, just to give you an example, so, we thought that we knew what all the provisions under the sick leave law meant. And just Friday, they issued a new directive that changed some things. So for instance, because this has gone on longer than was initially anticipated, they have revised the definition for place of care for, the one that talks about needed to care for a child who's no longer in school because school isn't operating. They've now changed that to include summer camps and all the places where kids might ordinarily be in the summer. because sadly, it looks like that may be disruptive as well now. So the FMLA they've clarified that it also would apply once school is out, if this is still an issue and the care provider then becomes like would have been a summer camp or something, then it still applies. The other thing that they clarified, and this was the more significant of their clarifications, so you know that under the expanded FMLA, the first 2 weeks are unpaid unless they also qualify for one of the reasons under the sick leave, in which case they can use that for pay during the first 2 weeks. During the last 2 weeks, the DOL had issued conflicting opinions within its own regulations about whether or not an employee could choose or an employer could require somebody to use accrued paid time. And what they have now said is during those last 10 weeks, an employee can choose to use their concurrent use of their accrued paid time, whatever that is, through the employer, or the employer can require it. So now it's consistent with the regular FMLA. And the reason why that's, well, for the purpose of caring for a child whose school is closed, the reason why that's important to know is because if the leave is used concurrently, the employee would receive 100%, as opposed to if they're using the leave available under the paid sick leave law, they're only getting 2/3 of their regular rate. So you've got to be sure that you're paying them correctly depending on which kind of leave they're taking. I know it boggles the mind, doesn't it?
Is there, I know that I have found it really helpful to subscribe to, the governor has a subscription service, the Department of Labor. So you can go to the State of Maine website and subscribe to updates from various departments and state government. And I find that to be helpful.
And also mind-blowing.
And mind-blowing. You know, for employers, what do you recommend in terms of just aside from what we're doing here, how do they keep up with all of these changes? Where is the best resource or source for information? Now, the Department of Labor is trying to keep their FAQs updated.
Yes.
What are your thoughts as far as a good resource?
I mean, really, it's the Department of Labor, both the state and the federal, and it's scary because there is so much to process and so many new things every single day. And then once they get a change, then you get 45,000 people who write about it, some of which is correct, some's not correct, and it becomes totally overwhelming. So I think it's best to stick with direct information from the DOL is the most secure source for sure. Whether or not it's always comprehensible is, you know, for people who don't do this on a regular basis and are just trying to figure out how this works, you know, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah.
I see there's a question, a good one, about the temperatures.
Yeah.
Talk about that?
Yeah, let me read this question. I thought this was interesting too, because earlier you had mentioned keeping medical information for employees. And this question is, if we're checking temperatures when employees arrive at work, can we just use a list of all employees, have like a checkoff sheet? We do not write down the exact temps. Is it okay to just keep these in one consolidated file, not separate employee medical files?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, it would be untenable to, I mean, what are you going to do? Cut little, you know, each person's name off and stick it in their own personnel file. I mean, I get that. And I think that that's okay, as long as it's maintained in a separate and confidential file. But I'm intrigued by the not writing down the exact temps. I assume that means you're just checking off no temperature. So I'm guessing there's a column that says, you know, no temperature or temperature. And if it's a check in the temperature box, then something else happens separately. And I think that's okay. I would keep, it's got to be separate and confidential, but I think you could keep every day in the same file. I mean, you know, day after day, you could just keep one running file confidentially. Yes.
COVID confidential file.
COVID file. Yeah.
The COVID file. Can you speak to unemployment questions, and yay or nay, it's up to you, but there is a question about clarification around the extra $600.
I know, and I looked that up earlier because there was something new about that as well. And now I don't know where it is. But there's something, and again, you know, this is going beyond what I know well. There's something that looks very complicated about this, about the employees could be at risk for losing their regular unemployment. And I don't know, oh, wait, here it is. So there's a new DOL guidance that clarifies eligibility for the $600 payment. I mean, I could read it, but I guess maybe the best thing to do is refer people to the DOL. I mean, what it says is, as long as somebody is eligible to actually receive at least a nominal amount of regular unemployment benefits for a given work week, they will also receive the $600 payment, with some exceptions, I guess. But no, it's just, I don't have a short answer to that.
My understanding, and it's just my understanding, so don't hold me to it, but my understanding from what I've heard and through conversations with the commissioner, that is coming from the federal government. You file for unemployment with the state, and if you are approved for unemployment, you will receive that extra $600 from the feds. Now, my other understanding is that this is while you're on furlough. So if your employer has to let you go because of the situation we're in, when that employer calls you back to work, you have to accept the job. If you don't accept the job that's offered back to you, you do not get that $600.
Well, the other difficulty that this points out is that if the employees, if they're working, if they're only partially unemployed, so maybe they're called back to do a partial job, this says that if the individual's earnings for the week exceed the weekly benefit amount, then not only would they get zero in unemployment, they would also not get the $600. So apparently there are going to be some, I don't know, some ways where this could negatively impact somebody as opposed to being a benefit to them.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I would look,
right?
See, we're just as confused. I guess I would check the DOL. DOL has a running Q&A sort of fact sheet on their website. I've referred to that, and they're updating that regularly. So you might want to take a look there.
Yeah, because this all falls under the CARES Act, which is different than the two acts that we've been talking about, and has nothing to do with leave or anything else. And so there are separate resources under the DOL for the CARES Act and how that applies.
Okay.
So what we could do, I guess, is if we could put a link to the guidance letter that this is referring to. It was issued on April 4, so it's probably one of the more updated, or if not the most updated one. And it apparently discusses several of the provisions of the CARES Act and how these apply. So maybe we should do that.
Yeah. Can you guys do that and add
Yes.
a link to the comments here?
I mean, it may be that we need to schedule a separate one of these just on, the PPP and the unemployment, as the CARES Act as a whole separate entity from the FFCRA.
Yeah. Okay. And I also, I meant to look for it today. I just didn't have the time, but I do know that DOL is putting out their own webinars. So I'll see what DOL has, that people can check out and tune into to get more clarification on the unemployment. I I just found News Center 207. I just had an interview with Commissioner Fortman asking a lot of questions, and people were calling in questions. So if you just Google or go to the News Center 207 page, you'll probably find that. I believe that just happened last week. So you can check that out. And there may be some answers there regarding unemployment that would be helpful to you as well.
Yeah, and I don't know if she would address the federal question as well. That's part of the problem, is that Maine is administering its own amended unemployment. But then this is all, you know, the whole, and that's what part of what's is important here, is that how the state and the federal interplay so that somebody can maximize their benefits as opposed to getting one which makes them lose another.
Right, right. If you have other questions, we'll stay here for a few more minutes. Just type them into the comments. Any questions for Anne Marie's story, specifically regarding your employees, your workplace, anything that you'd like to know? It looks like something just came in. Okay, that's another PPP question. Maybe later or left.
So while you're looking at the questions, I did want to address some of the other things from the EEOC. I don't want employers to forget that you may have to provide reasonable accommodation to people who have a disability that could be aggravated by COVID, or even the stress of potential COVID in the workplace. And so they have been clear that if I'm somebody with an underlying respiratory illness, for instance, and I approach my employer and say, I feel like I'm at particular risk, I would like an accommodation, you can't just say, you know, forget about it. You have to go through the same analysis you always would. And the EEOC has given some examples, like they always do, about what reasonable accommodations might be. These are the things that they have listed. Designating one-way aisles or hallways. So for instance, they're even talking about doing that in some of the grocery stores and big box stores where you can only go one direction down an aisle, or a hallway if you still have people in the workplace. Using plexiglass, labels, or other barriers to ensure minimum distance between customers and coworkers whenever feasible. Or other accommodations that reduce the chance of exposure, which of course includes working remotely and doing all the things that most of us are already doing. They also addressed a situation where somebody has a pre-existing mental illness or disorder that is aggravated by COVID, either by having it or by fear of having it or by fear of other people having it or any of those things. Again, you are charged with treating that just like any other request for reasonable accommodation. It may be that no accommodation is possible. It may be they don't actually have a disability, but you have to go through the same analysis you ordinarily would go through.
Interesting. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, can I say one more thing?
Of course.
So they actually specifically addressed, this was the question asked, may an employer postpone the start date or withdraw a job offer because the individual is 65 years old or pregnant, both of which place them at a higher risk from COVID? So if you have that situation, the answer is no. You cannot withdraw a job offer or a start date just because, and I assume they're not trying to be flippant by choosing those categories. They're talking about any person who thinks they are or actually are at increased risk of contracting COVID can't simply withdraw a job offer that has been made just for that reason. You have to go through the reasonable accommodation process, which might include teleworking so that they're not exposed. So,
Interesting.
Not sure why they choose those two categories, but there they are.
Wow. Wow. Any other questions, employment law related? Post them in the comments. The PPP questions, I know, and I'll look and see if I can find some good resources for you. SBA.gov has a lot of information there about the PPP program and the other SBA programs. And they've got some good FAQs there as well. And that's something we'll certainly be talking more about as those programs have rolled out very quickly and funds are starting to, loans are starting to be processed, which is great. So more questions coming on that and more answers certainly. Anything else, Anne Marie, that comes to mind that you want to be sure people are aware of?
I mean, yes, I'm sure there is, but I think that's probably all people can process for right now. But just to summarize, so we've got the new OSHA poster that everybody should disseminate or put up. We've got we've got the comment period for the regular paid leave law, non-COVID related, on Wednesday afternoon from 5 to 7, the listening session, and the end of the comment period on April 27 if people want to do that. We're going to post this DOL unemployment insurance guidance letter from the federal government, so people have access to that. And I also said that not to jump around, but we would post the proposed regulations to the non-COVID paid leave law so people can review those and make sure they get any questions answered.
And let me find out the status on that public hearing. As I mentioned when we first started this conversation, there is an effort underway led by the Maine State Chamber to postpone that public hearing, given that employers have a lot more on their plates right now, and they want to be sure that employers can really wrap their head around what that paid leave law looks like and the impact to their business. I will find out and post an update right after this session, see if that is in fact happening or if it is still scheduled this week.
Okay, because the website still lists this week as the date. So
all right. Let me see what's going on with that. I guess that's it for now then. I can't think of anything else, and it looks like the questions have been answered. Anything that we didn't answer, we'll try to respond in the comments later on, get you some resources and some information to help. Sound good?
that sounds good. I hope everybody keeps power tonight.
Yeah, a little crazy. Thank you so much, Anne Marie Story, Rudman Winchell, Karen Sichters, producing, Shelley Sun from the Chamber putting this together as well. We plan to do this every Monday afternoon. Hi, there's Shelley. Next Monday is I'm not sure because I think we're gonna give our staff a day off as well. But for the most part, Mondays at 3. Just watch our Facebook page and announcements from the Bangor Region Chamber and Rudman as well, and we'll let you know. Thank you, Anne Marie.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Yay.